In the golden age of rock music, a time when big bands made a name for themselves on stage and their hits echoed through stadiums, the band Lynyrd Skynyrd dominated. Thanks to their legendary Southern charm and unforgettable hits like Sweet Home Alabama and Tuesday's Gone, which became the anthem of a generation, Lynyrd Skynyrd was more than just another band. They shared stages with rock legends like the Rolling Stones and The Who, marking their place among the greats. They were a cultural phenomenon that left a deep impression on the music world and far beyond. But in October 1977, just when Lynyrd Skynyrd were at the height of their fame and the world was still reeling from their just-released album Street Survivors, disaster struck. It was a moment no one could have foreseen, and one that would change the course of rock history forever. This is the story of Lynyrd Skynyrd. On October 17, 1977, in the middle of this wave of success, Lynyrd Skynyrd released their album Street Survivors, with a striking album cover showing the band members surrounded by flames. This album was destined to become their most memorable work. The success was noticed, and the band decided to organize a large-scale American tour. For this tour, they rented a Convair 240 aircraft, a classic American twin-engine medium-range airliner with registration number N55VM. They chose the convenience and efficiency it offered to transport their equipment and personnel. What they did not know was that the aircraft had previously been inspected by the management of Aerosmith, another popular rock band, who ultimately decided not to use the plane because they were concerned about the competence of the crew. During an inspection, management noticed that the pilot and co-pilot were drinking from a bottle of Jack Daniels. On October 19, 1977, during a flight from Lakeland, Florida on their way to their next show, the band experienced a problem with the right engine of their Convair 240 aircraft. This resulted in a 10-foot stream of sparks and flames. The aircraft landed safely, but band members were very shocked by this incident. Some expressed their concerns about the plane to lead singer Ronnie Van Zant and considered leaving the tour unless a replacement plane arrived. Backup vocalist Casey Gaines and sister of lead guitarist Steve Gaines was so scared she almost tried to squeeze into the band's cramped equipment truck. But lead singer Ronnie Van Zant, who was a strong influence on the band, assured them that nothing would happen and that replacing the aircraft meant canceling their tour dates. He felt the band could not simply abandon their loyal Southern fans. He said the following, "Hey, if the Lord wants you to die on this aircraft, when it's your time, it's your time. Let's go, man. We've got a gig to do." But surprisingly, it worked. He managed to convince them to continue their tour by aircraft. In retrospect, the band's choice to ignore the clear safety warnings about the plane would have disastrous consequences. On October 20th, 1977, the band had just performed a smashing show in Greenville, South Carolina, and was on their way to Baton Rouge, Louisiana State University for their next concert. The band's talented lineup at that time consisted of Ronnie Van Zant as lead singer, Steve Gaines, Alan Collins, and Gary Rossington on guitars, Artemis Pyle on drums, Leon Wilkeson on bass, and Billy Powell on keyboards. They also had a talented trio of female background vocalists named JoJo Billingsley, Leslie Hawkins, and Cassie Gaines, known as the Honkettes. A total of 26 people, including the members of Lynyrd Skynyrd, their road crew and flight crew, boarded the same 30-year-old Convair 240 aircraft that had been used before. They were all in high spirits, unaware of the tragedy that awaited them. What was meant to be a short trip soon escalated into a horrific event. The pilot had completed an IFR flight plan at the Greenville Flight Service Station, and they were ready for departure. At 16:02 local time, the aircraft took off from Greenville Downtown Airport to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The flight would take about 2 hours and 45 minutes. The aircraft was equipped with sufficient fuel for a duration of 5 hours. The flight, which initially went smoothly according to the planned flight plan, took an unexpected turn shortly after takeoff. The pilot, who had initially been instructed to climb to 5,000 feet, made a decision that deviated from the plan. He steered the aircraft to a higher course and eventually reached 12,000 feet. This action required a quick adjustment in flight control, and the pilot had to resume his original flight plan. While the aircraft was flying at 12,000 feet, the situation remained contained. The pilot requested and received permission to descend to 6,000 feet, returning to a more usual flying altitude for the remainder of the trip. At 1842, the routine of the flight was disrupted by a sudden and critical development. The aircraft's right engine, which had caused problems during their previous flight, again began to falter, increasing the aircraft's fuel consumption. The crew members didn't notice that their fuel was running low and tried to transfer the remaining fuel to the other tank, but this resulted in the accidental discharge of the remaining fuel. The aircraft suddenly lost power and began to descend rapidly. They immediately contacted the Houston Air Route Traffic Control Center, ARTCC, to report their situation. "Yes, sir. We need to get to an airport, the closest airport you've got, sir." Houston Center asked the crew if they were in an emergency situation, and they responded with, "Yes, sir. We are low on fuel and we're about out of it. We want vectors to Macomb. Post haste, please, sir." Houston Center advised turning to a different course. The pilot said, "We are not declaring an emergency, but we do need to get close to Macomb as straight and good as I can get, sir." The pilots tried to make an emergency landing at a nearby airport, but they realized that they would not make it. They saw an open field and tried to land there, but the aircraft was too low and going too fast. While the pilots were struggling to keep the aircraft in the air, the passengers were unaware of the impending doom. They had no idea that their aircraft was running out of fuel and that they were about to crash. They were enjoying their time, playing cards, chatting, and listening to music. Some of them were even asleep, like Ronnie Van Zant, the band's lead singer, who was lying in the back of the aircraft with a pillow over his head. The only passenger who had a glimpse of the dire situation was Artemis Pyle, the band's drummer, who decided to visit the cockpit. He was shocked to see the panic on the pilots' faces as they frantically tried to find a place to land. At 1845, Air Traffic Control inquired about the aircraft's current flying altitude. The crew replied, "We are at 4.5. This appeared to be the last contact before disconnection. The band's drummer, Artemis Pyle, realized that something was terribly wrong and ran back to warn the others. He shouted, "Brace yourself," as he saw the trees looming closer. The terror quickly spread among the passengers as they realized they were about to crash. Guitarist Gary Rossington vividly remembered a chilling noise that sounded like hundreds of baseball bats hitting the outside of the aircraft as it began to hit the trees. At 1855, a weak transmission was picked up from an emergency locator transmitter, ELT. The plane crashed and was destroyed by the impact, but no fire followed because there was too little fuel in the tanks. The aircraft clipped the top of trees and broke apart as it crashed into a swamp near Galesburg, Mississippi. The impact was so devastating that some of the passengers lost their lives instantly, while others were thrown out of the aircraft and into the swamp. The crash claimed the lives of frontman Ronnie Van Zant and guitarist Steve Gaines, who lost their lives on impact, and backing vocalist Casey Gaines was thrown from the aircraft. The band's road manager Dean Kilpatrick and the aircraft's two pilots, Walter McCree and William Gray, were also found deceased. Although most of the survivors were in the back of the plane, none escaped without serious injuries. Keyboardist Billy Powell suffered serious injuries, including a nose that was nearly torn off and extensive cuts to his face and legs that nearly led to fatal bleeding. Guitarist Gary Rossington broke both arms, both legs, both wrists, both ankles, and his pelvis. Drummer Artemis Pyle suffered multiple broken ribs in the crash. The other survivors suffered severe injuries, such as broken bones, burns, and cuts. Some of them were trapped in the wreckage and had to wait for hours before they were rescued by local volunteers. One of the survivors, Gary Rossington, the guitarist, later recalled how he regained consciousness amidst the wreckage and saw the bodies of his friends. He said, "It was dark. I couldn't move. I knew I was hurt badly." He managed to crawl out of the aircraft and navigated through the challenging terrain of a swampy creek and a dark field to reach a nearby farmhouse for help. Emergency responders swiftly arrived at the scene, rushing everyone to various hospitals. One of the most haunting aspects of this aircraft crash is the premonition that Ronnie Van Zant had about his own passing. The band's lead singer had a strong premonition that he would not live to see his 30th birthday. He had shared this premonition with his father Lacey and his wife Judy, both of whom tried to reassure and convince him of his misfortune. His father vividly remembered their conversations. He said to me many times, "Daddy, I'll never be 30 years old." I'd question him, "Why are you speaking this way? You won't make it to 30. And he'd always reply, "Daddy, that's my limit." Even Judy, Ronnie's wife, had listened to him talk about his impending doom so often that as soon as she heard about the aircraft crash, she was sure that Ronnie was among the ones who didn't survive. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, eventually launched an investigation into the cause of the aircraft crash and concluded that the probable cause of the accident was fuel exhaustion and crew negligence. However, the NTSB also clarified that the engine malfunction alone was not a major issue and that the aircraft could have flown safely with one engine if the crew had managed the fuel supply properly. The NTSB's investigation revealed that the crash was preventable and that the crew's inattention to the fuel supply was a fatal mistake. They also revealed that the accident was survivable for the passengers in the cabin because there was no fire and some parts of the aircraft fuselage remained whole during the collision. But the other parts, especially the cockpit, deformed tremendously during the collision, and therefore the accident was not survivable for the occupants of these parts. The survival rate was improved due to the presence of 6 medical doctors and 20 corpsmen and emergency medical technicians at the scene of the crash. They provided diagnoses, treatment, and stabilization to the victims before their evacuation to the hospital. Unfortunately, the aircraft accident was just the beginning of a series of tragedies and losses for the band. In the years that followed, they experienced additional fatalities and misfortunes. In 1986, Alan Collins, the band's guitarist, suffered a car accident that took the life of his girlfriend and left him paralyzed. He eventually succumbed to chronic pneumonia in 1990. In 2001, Leon Wilkeson, the group's bassist, was found lifeless in his hotel room. This series of unfortunate events continued, as in 2009 the band's keyboardist, Billy Powell, also passed away of a heart attack. The remaining members of the band formed tribute bands and continued to perform in memory of their fallen bandmates. The accident marked a pivotal moment in both the band's history and the history of rock music. Despite encountering numerous tragedies and losses, the band's musical heritage and impact have remained steadfast. Their iconic tracks, including Sweet Home Alabama and Freebird, continue to be cherished and played by millions of admirers globally. Lynyrd Skynyrd has sold more than 28 million records and was rightfully inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2006. In 2023, the band's last original member, guitarist Gary Rossington, passed away after enduring prolonged health issues. His passing represented the final direct connection to the original formation of Lynyrd Skynyrd. The original band may have taken its final bow, but their music plays on, a lasting legacy to a band that was indeed more than just a band. They were, and always will be, Lynyrd Skynyrd.